Hello, and thank you so much for your participation in this year's Point in Time Count. This training, we will talk about the survey form, where to go to find people, and who to interview. The general survey form is for everyone. It's the ideal way to collect information about the people you'll be interacting with because it relies on people's own responses to the questions that we have. Our goal is for every person that you encounter to answer the questions on the general survey form. In a few slides, I'll start going over what specific questions and information you'll be asking people, and then we'll talk about how to start conversations and conduct interviews with people. Before we dive into the survey form you'll use and the questions that you'll ask, let's start with a few general tips on how to conduct surveys. I'll keep repeating some of these points throughout training, but it's important to start thinking about them now. First and foremost, always be respectful of the people that you meet during the count. Remember that they are vulnerable and that you're asking some pretty personal questions. Be respectful of their choice not to answer any or all questions. It's okay if someone refuses to participate. Getting their consent to talk to them and record their information is important. If they do consent to speaking with you, be sure to ask every question on the survey. It's okay to skip the ones that they might answer for you earlier in the conversation. For example, maybe they tell you they're a veteran before you ask, so you don't need to re-ask them later when you get to that question. Finally, there may be some questions on the survey that feel a little awkward or uncomfortable to ask. It's okay and normal to feel that way, but it's important that you do ask all of the questions in the way we phrase them. The gender question is a good example. A lot of people might think that they can identify someone's gender by looking at and talking to them. So rather than asking, "How do you identify your gender?" they might instead want to say, "Okay, and so I can see that you're male," or "You're male, right?" to someone that they think is a man. There are a few reasons that we don't want you to do that. First, there are people who don't identify as the gender they might most readily look like, and phrasing questions in a way that makes it seem like you think you know the answer is much more likely to lead to them saying, "Yep, that's right," rather than giving you the answer of how they actually identify. Second, there are many people who identify as something other than male or female, or whose gender identity is different from what you might think it is when looking at them. They live in a world where people probably make assumptions about them every day, and each time someone repeats that kind of judgment, it could feel really harmful to the person you're asking, and that kind of harm adds up to a lot over time. So by choosing to ask everyone, "How do you identify your gender?" you are doing a service to those who wish others knew to ask that question in a more open-ended way, rather than assuming or prescribing their identity. This same premise applies to all of the questions on the Pit Count survey. Keep in mind that folks who've been living in unsheltered locations for a long time may identify that location as, quote, "safe place to sleep." So it's important to verify whether or not that, quote, "safe place" is sheltered if the person says they have one. Remember to avoid labeling people as homeless. You should not go up to someone and say, "Hey, are you homeless?" There is stigma around this term, meaning that many people who may be experiencing homelessness might not want to identify as homeless. Instead, just ask about where they slept last night. After you've introduced yourself, explain what the Pit Count survey is and ask if they're willing to answer your questions. It's extremely important to explain what you're doing and to get the person's consent or permission to participate before you start asking questions and recording their responses to the survey. Remember, everyone has a right to refuse to participate. The box at the bottom of this slide has an example of how you can do this. Quote, "We're conducting a survey, and your participation will help the community provide better resources and services for people who might not have a safe home to sleep at night. It'll take about 5 to 10 minutes, and you don't have to answer any questions that you don't want to answer, and it's all anonymous, meaning your name won't be used. Are you willing to answer these questions?" Additionally, incentives should only be given to participants who are willing to answer the survey questions. Step number 3, conduct the interview using the survey form. So you'll go through each question in the survey form, and remember, people have the right not to answer all questions. You could also add any notes that may be helpful. For example, if a person says that they have their own apartment, but they're sitting on a bench outside of a 24-hour grocery store very late at night with what appears to be all of their belongings, write down that you think there may be a discrepancy in what they are saying versus where they slept last night. Also, please remember to write legibly. At the top of the survey form, you will write in your assigned team number, check if you are counting during the day or night count, write in your name, and the city and county that you're in while completing the survey. Please do not skip this section. Next, you will read the prepared script to introduce yourself and ask for consent from the participant to proceed with the survey. This first paragraph says, "Hello, my name is Laurie Ann, and I'm a volunteer for the Homeless Coalition. We are conducting a survey to determine how many people in our community are experiencing homelessness. This survey includes questions about your housing, health, and other identifying information. The survey takes about 10 minutes, and your answers are confidential. Have you already completed a survey? If not, would you be willing to participate?" At this point, if consent is not gained, thank them for their time and offer them information about Project Homeless Connect, and move along. If consent has been gained, begin to work your way through the survey questions. Section 1 is the participant information. You'll ask for the person to provide their first and last name and middle initial, as well as their date of birth. If they don't want to provide their date of birth, you can check the box next to the age group that looks like the person belongs to. You'll then ask if they are a U.S. military veteran, and you'll also ask for their full Social Security number. Then you will ask the person how they identify their gender, their ethnicity, and their race. When you get to Section 2, Housing Information, make sure you ask where the participant slept last night, which will be the night of Monday, January 23rd, 2023. Wait for them to provide the answer. Do not read through the list of places on the survey form. Again, wait for the person to provide the answer of where they slept last night. Do not read the list of places on the survey form. When they answer the question, check the box next to the provided location. If they gave an answer that falls within the box on the right, do not continue with the rest of the survey. In this case, thank the participant for their time, provide them with information on Project Homeless Connect. If the participant provides you with an answer that falls on the left-hand side of the form, check the box next to the provided sleeping location and continue to Section 3, the DV-related questions. The DV-related questions ask if the person is experiencing homelessness due to a current domestic violence, dating violence, or sexual assault or stalking situation. If the person says yes, you will ask how long did the DV experience occur, and move along to the next question. When you get to Section 4, make sure to read and review the guidance in red. I'll read through this question and the guidance now. 4A says, is this the first time you have experienced homelessness? 4B says, when did this current episode of homelessness begin? If this is not your first time experiencing homelessness, this would be the date that you most recently began sleeping in a shelter and/or on the streets. The guidance reads, if the participant has difficulty making this determination, Try asking if they recall the last time they were sleeping somewhere other than a shelter or the streets. Maybe in a hotel or motel that they paid for, a friend or family member's home, or maybe their own apartment or house. It may also be helpful in narrowing down the date to ask if they remember if it was around a particular holiday or during which season of the year it occurred. The exact date may not be possible. Just try to help them narrow it down as much as possible. Then you can provide the month, the date, and the year of when their current episode of homelessness began. The additional guidance reads, if the participant reported the current episode as being their first time experiencing homelessness, you can skip 4C and move to section 5. 4C reads, if you live on the streets or an emergency shelter in 2020, if yes, how many times and for how many total months? The next part of this question reads, did you live on the streets or an emergency shelter in 2021? Again, it asks if yes, how many different times and for how many total months? And then the final part of this question asks, did you live on the streets or an emergency shelter in 2022? If yes, how many different times and for how many total months? Section 5, Health Information. You can read the prompt to let them know that this next section asks some sensitive information. Remember, they can refuse to answer any questions. You don't have to be pushy to get their info. You can continue through asking about any diagnosed disabling conditions. There's no need to ask them to go into detail about their diagnosis. Try to stay as surface level as possible when asking about disabilities. The Section 5 prompt reads, now I'm going to ask you a few questions about your physical and mental health. These questions are specifically about conditions and diagnoses that are considered long-term disabilities. I respect these are personal questions and you can refuse to answer any or all of them. Your choice not to answer will not impact your ability to receive services in the future. If you're ready, I'll continue. Wait for consent. The next part of the question reads, has a medical or mental health professional, the Social Security Administration, or the Veterans Administration ever diagnosed you as having any of the following disabling conditions? Then the guidance reads, you can read the full list of conditions and mark each with the participant's response. The disabling conditions read physical disability, mental health disorder, HIV or AIDS, chronic health condition, developmental, alcohol use disorder, drug use disorder, or both alcohol and drug use disorder. After you have gotten this information from the participant, you can move to Section 6. Section 6 asks about household members that slept in the same location as the participant on January 23, 2023. The definition of a household is in the current slide. This definition reads, a household is any group of people that present together and identify themselves as a family. Family includes, but is not limited to, regardless of marital status, actual or perceived sexual orientation, or gender identity, any group of persons presenting for assistance together with or without children, and irrespective of age relationship, or whether or not a member of the household has a disability. A child who is temporarily away from the home because of placement in foster care is considered a member of the family. The first question in Section 6 asks, are there any other adults or children in your household who were sleeping in the same location as you on the night of Monday, January 23, 2023? You'll mark yes or no based on the participant's response. The next question says, if yes, proceed to the next page to complete information for each additional household member. If no, the survey is now complete. And then the surveyor can thank the participant, provide them information on Project Homeless Connect. Page 3 is where you will add additional household member information. If there are 2 adults in the household, let's say John and Sally, each adult will complete their own separate survey. When you get to page 3 on John's survey, you will put Sally's information in the Adult 1 section. You will do the same while completing Sally's survey. When you get to page 3 on her survey, you will put John's information in the Adult 1 section. Then, you will staple their surveys together, leaving no doubt that these 2 adults are in a household together. Step 4 talks about closing the interview. Once you've completed the survey, you can thank the person for their time, refer them to any services or resources that they may have asked about or may need, offer everyone a Project Homeless Connect flyer, and give the incentive to the people that completed the survey. Step 5 talks about recording what you heard and observed during the conversation. After the survey is complete, you can walk away from the person that you interviewed to a safe place. Take a few minutes after your conversation just to double check that you've completed the whole survey form. Include any additional notes or details about the conversation that you think are important. And then please make sure everything that you have written is legible and readable. This is an image of a sample map. It is similar to what your team will be provided. The blue outlines the boundaries of the area that you are to stay within. Please do not go outside of your area. We want to avoid counting the same person more than once. Here are ideas and lists of places on where to go to look for people to interview. For outdoor public places, you can check in parks, public benches, bus stops, doorsteps of businesses that may be closed for the night, encampments, and parked cars. Some indoor places to think about would be 24-hour businesses like grocery stores, McDonald's, Walmarts, or convenience shops. You can also check libraries, hospital parking lots, bus, train, and metro stations. You can also talk to people that you see out and about and ask them if they have any recommendations on where they know of anyone that may not have a safe place to sleep at night. You can ask employees at businesses that are open. You can ask law enforcement, and you can also ask other participants that you've interviewed for suggestions. So it's important to talk through who you should be attempting to interview for the pit count, especially with first-time volunteers. It's not always possible to determine if someone is experiencing homelessness based solely on how they look. So you really want to consider, where do you see the person? What is the person doing? And also, what time is it? Is the person moving with a purpose? Are they wearing a uniform indicating that they might be going to work or coming from work? Are they carrying a lot of things with them or wearing a lot of layers that could include all of their clothing? These are some things to think about. So when it comes to who to interview, there is a pitfall, which would be making assumptions about who to interview using stereotypes of what homelessness looks like. So your best practice is to approach everyone you see. You can use a soft, non-confrontational introduction that's easy to reverse course if the person is not experiencing homelessness. For example, quote, "Hi, my name is Laurie Ann. We're out here trying to talk to people who might not have a safe place to sleep last night. Do you have a safe place to sleep? Okay, well, do you know where I might find some people around here who don't?" So we don't anticipate anyone being in any kind of dangerous situation during the pit count. However, we still advise you to follow certain safety practices to make sure that you're doing everything you can to prevent any harm from happening and to ensure that if something were to happen that threatened your safety or the safety of those around you, you'd know what to do. Let's start by talking about your safety as a volunteer, and then we'll talk about the safety of the people you'll be interviewing. For your safety, you should always be with at least one other person. Keep an appropriate conversational distance from those who you are interviewing. Maintain awareness of the space around you, like where other people are, ways to get in or out of the space that you're in, etc. Remain standing. It's okay to squat down to speak with someone who's sitting or lying on the ground, but always maintain your balance. Stay in places that are lit, including alleyways. If you use a flashlight, do so respectfully, i.e., don't shine it in anyone's face. Prioritize your own safety. If you don't feel safe approaching someone or going somewhere, don't. Do not transport anyone other than volunteers in your personal vehicle. Don't wake someone who's sleeping, and do not approach someone if it appears that a, quote, business transaction is taking place. For health and safety concerns, especially if it's cold and rainy outside, notice if the participant has layers under and on them to keep them warm enough. Notice if they're dry for hypothermia concerns, and check to see if you can see the rise and fall of their breathing. You should always call 911 if you or someone else is at risk of danger. Now that we've gone over all of the survey forms, safety tips, and other details, in this next part of the training, we're going to run through some quick do's and don'ts. We've covered most of this already today, but here are a few reminders of what you should do when conducting the pit count. Make sure that the person you're talking to consents to participating in the interview. It's so important in this process. It's okay if someone doesn't want to participate or doesn't feel comfortable answering certain questions. If they say no to answering your questions, thank them for their time, walk away, and fill out an observation form. While the pit count takes place largely in public spaces, they may be the only form of personal or private space that the people you're interacting with have. Refrain from being overly intrusive and disruptive. Enter with respect. This could be their home that you're entering. When approaching people and completing the pit survey, think of it like a conversation. Recognize that people will either be going back to sleep or will need to be on their way. Try to conduct the survey relatively quickly. Again, we've covered most of this already today, but here are a few reminders of what you should not do when conducting the pit count. Please respect the dignity of the people you're interacting with. Do not turn them into a spectacle for your own personal or social media purposes. Please do not take photos of or with the people that you encounter. As we discussed earlier, ask the survey questions as they're written, or at least in a way that does not presume you know the answer. For example, ask, how do you identify your gender? Do not ask, you're male, right? Do not try to build familiarity by sharing your own experiences, and do not ask for more information about the person's life than you need to complete the survey. Most people experiencing homelessness are asked to share their personal stories many times by different service providers conducting assessments and intakes, and this can be re-traumatizing every time they're asked to share over and over again. As a pit count volunteer, you are not able to provide services, so do not ask the person for more details than you need to complete your task at hand. Individual autonomy is key. We already talked about getting consent to ask people the pit count survey questions, but if they say they want to participate, then are not willing to answer one or more questions during the interview, that's okay. Do not make them answer anything that they are uncomfortable answering. And please don't tell people that you can get them services, resources, or housing. Don't promise that someone will follow up with them after the pit count unless you have verified that someone will actually follow up with them. Thank you so much for watching today's pit count survey training, and we will see you on the 24th.